Black boy fixes Angelina Jolie's flat tire. Her reaction shocks the world. It was a quiet, rainy evening as Angelina Jolie drove down a deserted road after attending a glamorous social event. The world outside was a blur of gray and mist, the rhythmic sound of raindrops on the car window almost soothing. Yet, deep inside, a sense of restlessness stirred. After a long day of interviews, charity events, and flashing cameras, she was finally heading home until something unexpected happened. With a sudden, jarring noise, the car swerved slightly. A flat tire. Angelina's heart skipped a beat. She pulled the car over to the side of the road and cursed under her breath. Alone, in the middle of nowhere, with no one in sight and her phone barely having any signal, she was stranded. Her mind raced, the pressure of the evening's events still weighing heavily on her shoulders. What was she going to do? As she sat in the car, wondering how long it would take for help to arrive, a figure appeared out of nowhere. A young black boy around 17 or 18 years old, holding a small toolkit, dressed in a worn jacket. He seemed to have materialized from the mist itself. Angelina frowned. Who was this boy? Was he just passing by? Or was he someone who could help? Should she trust him? The tension in the air was palpable. She didn't know whether to feel relief or caution. Was this stranger here to help? Or was he a threat? Just as she was about to open her door to speak with him, the boy stepped forward, offering his help with a calm confidence. What was his story? And why was he out here on such a stormy night? If you're enjoying this epic story, don't forget to subscribe to Epic Story Moments. Like, share, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. The boy stood there for a moment, his eyes focused on the car and then shifting back to Angelina. He seemed unfazed by the rain, the wind, or the muddy surroundings. His clothes were worn, his sneakers scuffed from walking for hours, but there was a quiet confidence in his demeanor. He wasn't here to judge or waste time. He was here to help. Angelina hesitated, her mind racing with uncertainty. Could she trust him? She didn't know what to make of the situation. It was late. She was far from any town, and the only sign of life on this lonely stretch of road was a stranger. Despite her fame, she often felt isolated in the world, a celebrity surrounded by people, yet profoundly alone. Yet, there was something in the boy's eyes, something genuine that made her wonder. Finally, she opened the door slightly, her voice tentative. "What's your name?" The boy straightened, offering a shy but sincere smile. "Jamal. I live just a few blocks from here. I work odd jobs around the area. Anything from lawn care to fixing tires. My mom, she's been sick for a while. I'm saving up money for her treatment." There was a raw honesty in his words, and for the first time that evening, Angelina felt a sense of warmth. She looked at him, studying the way he carried himself and the sincerity in his voice. He wasn't here to rob her or cause trouble. He was just a young man trying to make a living, caring for someone he loved. The thought lingered in her mind. She was still cautious but nodded. "All right, if you think you can fix it, I'll let you try." Jamal didn't hesitate. He immediately knelt beside the car, unzipping his worn backpack to pull out the small toolkit that looked like it had seen better days. With an efficiency that surprised her, he started working on the tire. His hands were steady, skilled, and his movements precise. There was no doubt in her mind now. This boy knew what he was doing. As he worked, Angelina's mind wandered. She watched him carefully, noticing how he wiped the rain from his forehead and kept his focus on the task at hand. His fingers worked quickly, each motion purposeful. The more she observed, the more she could see the depth of his character, the dedication to something greater than himself. He wasn't just fixing her tire. He was showing the world what he was capable of, no matter the circumstances. It was hard for Angelina not to think about the contrast between their lives. Here she was, with all her wealth, fame, and privileges, sitting in a car on the side of the road, relying on someone like him, someone who had far less, yet still found the strength to help. And he was doing it with no expectation of reward. As the boy worked diligently, She began to notice the small things that spoke volumes. His persistence in fixing the tire, the way he wiped the grease off his hands and kept going despite the rain soaking his jacket, his focus, as if this task was his responsibility, and he would see it through, no matter what. For a moment, Angelina forgot her fame and her stress. She just watched this young man, a stranger, yet somehow the most genuine person she had encountered in a while. The storm around them seemed to grow stronger, the winds howling as the rain battered the ground. She leaned back against her car, arms folded, thinking about her own struggles, the pressures of her career, the endless spotlight that never seemed to fade, the expectation to be perfect. And yet, here was Jamal. No fame, no fortune, and yet he had a clarity of purpose that felt real. But just as she thought everything was going smoothly, the quiet of the evening was suddenly interrupted. A car's headlights appeared in the distance, cutting through the stormy haze. At first, she barely noticed it, but as it drew nearer, she became aware that it was slowing down, its tires crunching on the wet road. The car came to a stop a few feet away from them. The figure inside rolled down the window, a man's face emerging from the shadows. "Need some help?" the man called out, his voice smooth and almost too friendly. The figure in the car wore a leather jacket, and his demeanor was calm. Too calm, too controlled for such a random occurrence. Jamal paused, glancing over at the man in the car. He was clearly sizing up the situation. "No, we're good here," Jamal answered quickly, his tone polite but firm. The man didn't seem to take no for an answer. He got out of the car and approached slowly. He was tall, his steps deliberate, his eyes scanning the scene with interest. There was something about his expression that made Angelina uneasy. It was too calculated, like he had a plan in mind. "You sure? This is a dangerous place to be stranded, especially on a night like this. I could give you both a ride into town, get you somewhere safe," the man said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Angelina's skin prickled with discomfort. She instinctively shifted in her seat, her eyes narrowing. Something about him felt off. He wasn't offering help in a genuine way. It was more like an opportunity he saw, a chance to manipulate the situation. Jamal stood his ground, clearly aware of the man's intentions. He was still crouched next to the tire, but he was alert, watching the man closely. The way his hands tightened around the tool spoke volumes. There was no way he was going to let this stranger get any closer. "We're fine. I said we don't need any help," Jamal said, his voice steady but firm, now standing between the man and the car. The stranger paused for a moment, eyeing Jamal with an unreadable expression. For a second, it seemed like he was about to argue. But then, as if realizing Jamal wasn't someone he could easily manipulate, he simply nodded, his smile faltering. "All right," the man said, backing away. "Just thought I'd be kind, that's all." He returned to his car without another word, his tires squealing as he sped off into the night, disappearing into the rain. Jamal didn't move until the headlights of the car were nothing more than a fading blur in the storm. Angelina let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The man's presence had unnerved her, and she was thankful for Jamal's quick thinking. "That was a little strange," she said softly, her voice filled with the lingering tension of the encounter. Jamal wiped his hands on his jacket and glanced back at her. "Yeah, some people like to take advantage of others in situations like these. But you were smart to trust me. It's not always easy to know who to trust, especially when things feel off." Angelina watched him for a moment, feeling a deep sense of appreciation for his calm and decisiveness. "I'm glad you were here," she said quietly, her voice sincere. She paused before adding, "I didn't think I'd be so lucky." Jamal gave a small smile. Sometimes, the right people show up at the right time. The rain had started to slow, and the tire was nearly fixed. Jamal finished the final adjustments, tightening the last bolts before standing up. He wiped his hands on his jacket one more time and gave her a nod. "All done," he said. "You should be good to go now." Angelina stepped out of the car and walked over to inspect the work. The tire looked perfectly fixed, as though it had never been flat in the first place. She was impressed by his skill and dedication. "Thank you, Jamal," she said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a few bills. "Let me at least give you something for your trouble." Jamal hesitated, looking at the money in her hand. "No, ma'am. I didn't help for the money. I did it because it was the right thing to do." Angelina's heart skipped a beat at his words. There was something profound in his response, something beyond the ordinary. "I appreciate that," she said softly. "You're a good person, Jamal." Jamal nodded, his face serious yet humble. "You're welcome." With that, Angelina got back into her car. As the engine roared to life, she gave him one last look, her thoughts racing. Who was this boy? What did life hold in store for him? And would she ever see him again? Angelina sat in the driver's seat, her eyes glued to the rear-view mirror as Jamal finished tightening the last bolt on the tire. The rain had almost stopped, and the storm had passed, leaving only the faint sound of dripping water in the silence. The car was now in perfect working order, thanks to Jamal's steady hands. Despite the exhaustion that had begun to creep into her bones, there was a quiet sense of relief. She could leave now, get back to her life, and put this strange encounter behind her. But as she looked at him through the rear-view mirror, a pang of guilt tugged at her chest. Jamal had helped her in a way no one else had. He had appeared from nowhere, out of the mist and rain, a stranger who had quietly taken charge and shown her kindness when she needed it most. Yet, she couldn't ignore the inexplicable weight that pressed down on her. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate his help. She did. She was genuinely grateful for what he had done. But somewhere in the back of her mind, a coldness began to take over. Was this really the world she lived in? Was this boy's kindness just a fleeting moment of good in an otherwise harsh reality? Could she really afford to get involved in the lives of strangers, people like Jamal, who were so far removed from the world she was part of? She took a deep breath and reminded herself that she had a life to return to. She couldn't afford to get too emotionally invested in this one encounter. As Jamal stepped back from the tire, wiping his hands on his jacket, Angelina reached into her purse and pulled out a few bills. She couldn't leave without offering him something. "Here," she said, her voice steady but distant, as she handed him the money. "Thank you for your help." Jamal looked at the money, and for a moment, his face showed a flicker of hesitation. He didn't take it immediately, his eyes searching hers as if looking for something more than just a transaction. His gaze softened, and there was a quiet moment of understanding between them, but it was quickly interrupted as he gently shook his head. "No, ma'am. I didn't do this for money," he said quietly. "I helped because it was the right thing to do. I don't want anything in return." Angelina felt her chest tighten, but she quickly mastered her emotions. She smiled politely, an expression that barely touched her eyes, and withdrew her hand. She tucked the bills back into her purse and nodded. "I understand," she said in a clipped tone, "but you should still take something for your trouble. It's the least I can do." Jamal hesitated, his eyes lingering on her for a moment longer before he stepped back, shaking his head once more. "No, thank you. I'm good." Angelina swallowed the lump in her throat. She hadn't expected him to refuse. She didn't know why it felt like a rejection, but it did. Maybe it was a realization that no matter how much she tried to give, it wouldn't be enough. She wasn't sure why she felt this way. After all, Jamal hadn't asked for anything. He hadn't even seemed to want anything. But her impulse to help him in return had been thwarted by his refusal. She couldn't shake the uncomfortable feeling that had crept into her chest. She glanced at him one more time, trying to read his expression, but his face was as unreadable as it had been when they first met. "Thank you again," she said, the words more distant now, as if the warmth that had existed between them moments ago had dissipated. Without waiting for another reply, she turned the key in the ignition, and the engine hummed to life. She shifted the car into gear, ready to leave, but before she could drive away, she hesitated. She was about to pull out, but something stopped her. The way Jamal had stood there, watching her, made her feel uncomfortable. He wasn't asking for anything, but somehow, his refusal had left her feeling empty, as though she had failed him in some way. She looked at him one final time through the side mirror as she slowly pulled away. He stood there, still and composed, his figure slowly fading from view. It was as though the moment between them had never happened. She could feel the weight of his gaze lingering long after he was out of sight. Did he feel disappointed? Did he think she was like all the others, too busy, too wrapped up in her own life to care about the people who mattered? The thought gnawed at her as she drove down the road. The rain now fully stopped, leaving behind a mist that seemed to envelop the world around her. She could see the outline of trees and houses in the distance, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She wasn't sure what had just transpired, but it didn't sit right with her. She had been cold, distant. Even though she had the chance to be kind, to acknowledge his generosity in a more meaningful way, why had she acted like that? For a moment, she considered turning around, going back to find him, to apologize for the way she had acted. But a part of her knew that would be pointless. There was nothing to apologize for, at least nothing tangible. She had thanked him. She had acknowledged his help. What more could she do? Yet, deep down, she felt that something was missing. A connection. Something more than just a brief exchange. She had a feeling that she had missed an opportunity. Something important that couldn't be put into words. Angelina spent the rest of the evening in silence, the quiet of her house amplifying her thoughts. As the night drew on, she couldn't shake the feeling of disconnection that had lingered after her brief encounter with Jamal. It was almost as though she had shut herself off from him, pushed away any possibility of a deeper connection. She had been polite, yes, but she had kept herself at a distance. Why? Was it because she feared vulnerability? After years of being in the public eye, constantly under scrutiny, was she so afraid of opening up to others, of letting someone like Jamal into her world? Even for a moment, the truth was she didn't know. But as she sat alone in her living room, staring at the empty space in front of her, she realized that the coldness she had projected might have been a reflection of the walls she had built around herself over the years. Jamal had given her a gift. He had shown her kindness in a way that few people had, but in return, she had held back. As the night stretched on and the world outside fell silent, Angelina found herself grappling with the realization that her actions hadn't aligned with her values. She wanted to be more than just a celebrity. She wanted to be real. But in that moment, she felt like she had failed both herself and Jamal. She hadn't been real at all. The thoughts kept her up long into the night, and when morning came, she knew something had to change. If she ever crossed paths with Jamal again, she wouldn't make the same mistake. She would find a way to be open, to show kindness without reservation, because sometimes the smallest gestures could have the biggest impact on a person's life. And in that moment, she was ready to make things right. But would it be too late? Would Jamal even remember her, let alone give her the chance to prove herself? Only time would tell. Later that evening, Jamal sat alone in his small, dimly lit room, the sound of the rain still faintly tapping against the window. The world outside seemed as though it had settled into a quiet calm, but inside, his mind raced. He couldn't stop replaying the encounter with Angelina over and over again. Was it worth it? The question lingered in his mind like an uninvited guest, one that wouldn't leave no matter how hard he tried to focus on something else. He had done something good, hadn't he? He had helped someone in need. But did it matter? Did it make any difference? Asterisk. Jamal let out a sigh and leaned back against the wall, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. There was a part of him that felt proud. Proud of the way he had helped someone, of the way he had stayed calm and focused even when things felt uncertain. But there was also a voice in his head, a voice that whispered doubts. Was he just a nobody? Was he doomed to always be a background character in someone else's story? Asterisk. The room was small, with peeling paint on the walls, and only the bare essentials, just a bed, a desk, and a small bookshelf filled with a few second-hand books. A picture of his mother, taken years ago before her health began to deteriorate, was propped up on the desk. He often stared at that picture, the smile on her face forever frozen in time. She had always been his rock. She was the reason he worked so hard. But the weight of his mother's illness was heavy on his shoulders, and with each passing day, he felt the burden of it grow. Her medical bills were piling up, and he had done everything he could to try to make ends meet. Odd jobs, extra hours at the corner store, anything to make a little more money for her treatment. But no matter how hard he worked, it never seemed like enough. The money was never enough to make the difference, to get her the treatment she needed. It felt like he was stuck in an endless cycle, where each step forward only brought him 2 steps back. His dreams of a better future for his family felt out of reach, just like the people who could help. Jamal had never been one to complain. He had learned early in life that the world didn't owe you anything. You had to work for everything you wanted. His mother had taught him that. She was strong, stronger than anyone he knew. Even when her health began to decline, she never complained. She just kept pushing forward, doing what she could to keep their family together. But now, as Jamal sat in his room, trying to make sense of everything, he realized that he didn't know how much longer he could keep going like this. His thoughts wandered back to the encounter with Angelina. She had been kind, yes, but something about her felt distant. There had been a moment, just after he fixed her tire, where he had expected some kind of connection, a sign that his act of kindness had made a difference. But all he had gotten was a polite thank you, and then she was gone. Nothing more. Had it been worth it? The question gnawed at him again, this time more insistently. His mind flashed back to the moment when he had first seen her. The fame and elegance of the Hollywood actress, the car on the side of the road, and the desperate need for help. She was a stranger, someone he would never have imagined crossing paths with in a million years, and yet there he was, fixing her tire, doing something that felt so simple but meaningful. But when she had driven away, it felt like it had all been forgotten, like she had just moved on to the next thing. It wasn't personal, of course. She was a busy woman, with her own life to deal with. But Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that, in the grand scheme of things, he had just been a momentary inconvenience for her. A brief stop on her way to wherever she was going. Jamal stared at the picture of his mother again, his thoughts drifting. Would his life ever be more than just a series of small moments that didn't matter? Would he ever be more than just a kid fixing tires on the side of the road, trying to scrape together enough money to help his mom? He had dreamed of something bigger. Dreamed of getting his mother the treatment she needed, of escaping the life he had been born into. But each day, it felt more and more like those dreams were slipping away. Suddenly, a memory flashed into his mind, a memory from a few years ago, before his mother's illness had taken such a toll. He was much younger, maybe 12 or 13, and he had just gotten his first real job working for a local mechanic. His mother had been there, waiting for him to come home from work, her face tired but still full of love. "Jamal, you're going to make something of yourself, I know it," she had said to him, her voice full of hope. "I see the way you work. You've got a good heart, and people will see that." Her words echoed in his mind now, as they always did when he was feeling low. But was that enough? He had a good heart. He worked hard, but it wasn't enough to fix the things that really mattered. A soft knock on his door pulled him out of his thoughts. "Jamal, you up?" His mother's voice called out from the other side. He quickly wiped his face, trying to hide the tears that had welled up without him realizing it. "Yeah, Mom, I'm here." The door creaked open and she stepped inside, her face pale and drawn from the exhaustion of another long day. But her eyes still held that familiar warmth. Asterisk, asterisk, the warmth that had been a source of strength for so long, asterisk, asterisk. "I'm proud of you, Jamal," she said softly, her voice full of love and weariness. "I know you're working hard. Just don't forget, you're doing this for us. Don't let the world make you think you're just one small piece in a big puzzle. You're more than that." Jamal swallowed, his throat tight. He wanted to tell her everything. How overwhelmed he felt, how tired he was of pretending that he could do it all on his own. But instead, he just nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "I won't forget, Mom. I promise." After she left, He sat there for a long time, lost in his thoughts. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that all his hard work, all his sacrifices, would eventually pay off. That someday, he would be able to help his mother the way she had always helped him. But right now, in this moment, it felt like he was stuck. No matter how much he gave, no matter how much he helped others, it wasn't enough to change his reality. Was helping Angelina worth it? Did it matter that he had done something kind for a stranger? Or was he just another invisible person in a world that never took notice? As Jamal laid down in his bed that night, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, the questions lingered. The struggle wasn't just about money or the pressure to care for his mother. It was about feeling like he was invisible, like no one would ever truly see him for who he was. He closed his eyes, hoping that tomorrow would be a better day. Maybe tomorrow, the world would be a little kinder to him. Maybe tomorrow, he would find the strength to keep going, asterisk, asterisk, to keep believing, asterisk, asterisk, that his kindness, his heart, would one day make a difference. But for tonight, all he could do was rest and hope that his mother's words would stay with him. You're more than that. The morning after his encounter with Angelina, Jamal was up before the sun. His day had started like any other, filled with routine and the weight of his responsibilities. He was used to the early mornings, the long hours, and the constant worry about his mother's health. But today, something felt different. Like a quiet energy was humming in the air, a sense of anticipation that he couldn't shake. As Jamal stepped out of his small apartment building and made his way to the bus stop, the usual hum of the city was interrupted by the sound of unfamiliar voices. He looked around, noticing a few people gathered near the corner of the street, their eyes trained on him. At first, he thought nothing of it until he saw the camera. A crew, a news crew. Before Jamal could process what was happening, a woman with a microphone approached him. She was well-dressed, wearing a sleek black blazer, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Her expression was warm, but there was a professional air about her that made Jamal immediately tense up. He had no idea what was going on, but the sight of the camera and the crew instantly made his heart race. "Excuse me, are you Jamal Carter?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Jamal froze for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Yeah, that's me," he said, still trying to make sense of the situation. The woman smiled brightly, stepping closer. "I'm Sarah Thompson, a reporter with the local news station. We've been trying to track you down. We have a special story we'd like to share with you." Jamal's mind raced. He felt like he was in a daze. What was this about? Why were they talking to him? He was just a regular guy, a teenager trying to make ends meet. There was nothing special about him. "I don't understand," Jamal said, his voice shaky. "What's going on? Why are you here?" Sarah glanced behind her, where several members of the news crew were preparing their cameras. "We're actually here because of something really incredible that happened yesterday. You might not know this, but your act of kindness toward a very special person caught the attention of someone very important." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. The only thing that came to mind was the incident with Angelina Jolie, the actress he had helped fix her car's flat tire the night before. He had never expected anything to come of it. It was just a random act of kindness, and in the grand scheme of things, it seemed insignificant. Why would anyone care? "I'm sorry," Jamal said, his voice quieter now. "I don't think I understand what you're talking about." Sarah's smile softened and she nodded. "It's about Angelina Jolie. She shared the story of how you helped her with your tire, and it really touched her. So much so, in fact, that she decided to do something for you." Jamal's brain couldn't process the words. Angelina Jolie? The famous actress? He had helped her, yes, but that was all. He didn't understand why anyone would make a big deal out of it. Sarah must have seen the confusion on his face because she continued. "Angelina has been following your story, and she's been moved by your situation. She knows about your mother's health struggles and how hard you've been working to make ends meet. So, she contacted us and arranged something very special for you." Jamal felt the ground beneath him begin to shift. as though the world was tilting. He couldn't catch his breath as the words started to sink in. Angelina Jolie, the woman he had helped for a few minutes, had actually noticed him, and now she was doing something to help him. It didn't make sense. It felt like a dream. I don't understand, Jamal stammered. What's she doing for me? Sarah smiled again, her expression full of warmth. Well, it's a life-changing opportunity. You're being offered a scholarship to a prestigious university of your choice. Not only that, but you'll also receive financial support for your mother's medical bills. Angelina has personally arranged everything through her foundation. Jamal's heart stopped. He felt like the world had come to a halt. His mind scrambled to process the information, but it was like the pieces weren't fitting together. He was just a kid, a teenager struggling to keep his family afloat. How was it possible that someone like Angelina Jolie, the world-renowned actress and humanitarian, was offering him a scholarship and medical assistance for his mother? "You're kidding, right?" he managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. "This can't be real." Sarah chuckled softly. "It's very real, Jamal. This is an incredible opportunity, and it's all because of the kindness you showed. You have no idea how much your actions impacted Angelina. She wants to see you succeed, to have the chance to follow your dreams." Jamal stood there, frozen, unable to speak. His mind was racing, but his body felt numb. He had been so focused on surviving, on getting by day after day, that he had never imagined something like this could happen. A scholarship, financial support, a chance to help his mother. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he quickly wiped them away. He didn't want to cry in front of the cameras. He wasn't sure why, but this moment, this unbelievable turn of events, was too much for him to process. I don't know what to say," Jamal said, his voice cracking. "You don't have to say anything," Sarah replied gently. "This is your moment, Jamal. You deserve this, and we're here to help you every step of the way." In that moment, Jamal felt something inside him shift. All the years of struggle, the weight of his responsibilities, the feeling that he was invisible, it all seemed to fade into the background. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen. He felt like someone cared about him, like his actions had meaning beyond just getting by. Jamal took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he looked at Sarah and the crew. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady now. "Thank you for this. I don't know how to explain how much this means." Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "You've earned it, Jamal, and this is just the beginning." As the crew began to pack up their equipment, Jamal stood there overwhelmed, his thoughts swirling. He couldn't quite believe it, but he knew one thing for sure. This was a turning point. His life was about to change in ways he never imagined, all because of one simple act of kindness, a kindness that had been noticed, that had been valued. And now, he had a future. The following week, Jamal's life was a whirlwind of news, interviews, and planning. He had received the scholarship, and the financial support for his mother's medical treatment was already in motion. The local community rallied around him, offering their congratulations, and the news crew had returned multiple times to capture his transformation. But amid all the excitement, there was one thing Jamal couldn't shake, a lingering sense of uncertainty. Why had Angelina been so distant when he had helped her? He replayed their encounter in his mind over and over. She had thanked him, yes, but her coldness had been hard to ignore. There had been no warm embrace, no sense of connection, just a polite acknowledgement and then her quick departure. What had that meant? Jamal wasn't sure if it was the fame, the stress, or something else entirely. But a part of him couldn't help but feel that his gesture had been dismissed. Despite everything that had followed, he couldn't quite shake the feeling that he was still an outsider in her world, a world he didn't belong to. Then one rainy afternoon, his phone buzzed with an unexpected call. "Hello, is this Jamal?" a voice asked on the other end. Jamal furrowed his brow. "Yes, this is Jamal. Who is this?" "It's Angelina Jolie." His heart skipped a beat. Angelina Jolie was calling him? Hi. How are you? Jamal managed to stutter, his mind racing. I'm doing well, thank you. Listen, I've been wanting to speak with you personally. I hope it's okay to call. Jamal swallowed, unsure of what to say. Of course. Wow. I didn't expect this. There was a brief pause on the line before Angelina's voice came through again, this time softer, more sincere. I know things must seem overwhelming, and I just wanted to explain myself. If that's all right, when you fixed my tire that night, I was so grateful. But I also felt guilty and a little embarrassed. I didn't know how to show my appreciation properly in that moment. Jamal felt his chest tighten. He hadn't expected this, an explanation from her. He had always wondered why she hadn't seemed more engaged in that moment. But hearing her words, something inside him started to relax. I was in a rush, and I didn't know how to process what had happened, she continued. I'm sure you can understand that in that moment. It was more about me trying to get away quickly. But the truth is, you did something so incredible for me, and it made me think deeply about my own life and the impact I want to make. Your kindness. It wasn't just about fixing my tire, Jamal. It was about seeing someone who had nothing to gain but still chose to help, with no expectation of anything in return. Jamal's heart swelled with emotion, his eyes beginning to sting with tears. This was what he needed to hear. I was overwhelmed, trying to find the right way to show my gratitude, Angelina admitted. So, I decided to give you something that could truly help. I didn't want to just say thank you and move on. I wanted to make a real difference in your life. There was a long pause, and Jamal could feel the weight of her words. This wasn't just a celebrity trying to make a nice gesture. This was someone who had been deeply moved by his actions, who had gone out of their way to make sure he was taken care of. Jamal, I need you to know that your kindness didn't just change my day. It changed my perspective on life, she continued. It reminded me of the importance of generosity and how little acts of kindness can create ripples in ways we can't even imagine. Jamal took a deep breath, trying to process everything. The woman who he had admired from afar, who he thought had brushed him off, was now telling him that his small act of kindness had deeply affected her. It was surreal. How had he gone from being a boy in need to someone whose actions could inspire change, in someone as influential as Angelina Jolie? I didn't expect anything, Angelina, Jamal replied, his voice thick with emotion. I just wanted to help, you know. My mom's been through a lot, and I just wanted to do something right for once. I never thought any of this would happen. I know, Jamal, and that's what makes it so powerful, she said warmly. That's what makes you different. You don't help people because you're looking for something in return. You help because it's the right thing to do. And that's why I wanted to help you. There was a moment of silence between them, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. Jamal felt a rush of relief, of understanding. I just wanted to thank you, Jamal, Angelina said finally. And I want you to know that this isn't just a one-time thing. I'm always going to be here for you. I'll be supporting you and your family, as long as you need me. Jamal couldn't speak for a moment, his chest tightening with emotion. He had never imagined that his life would take such a turn. The boy who had once been invisible, who had helped a stranger on the side of the road, was now someone who had the support of the world behind him. Thank you, Jamal whispered, his voice barely audible. Thank you so much. As the days went on, Jamal's life began to change in ways he could never have imagined. The scholarship opened doors to opportunities he never thought possible. His mother's medical bills were covered, and her health began to improve, thanks to the financial support that had come from Angelina's foundation. Jamal's future no longer seemed like an endless struggle. But beyond all of the material changes, it was the transformation within himself that mattered most. He had gone from feeling like an invisible, insignificant part of the world to realizing that kindness could truly make a difference. His actions had brought him more than just financial help. They had brought him a sense of purpose, a renewed belief in the power of human connection. Angelina had kept her word. She wasn't just a distant figure who had helped him once. She became a mentor, a guiding force in his life, and a constant reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could change everything. Jamal had learned something invaluable. Kindness doesn't just change the lives of others. It changes your own life too. As Jamal stood in the quiet park, his thoughts raced. It had been a few months since the day his life had turned upside down. The scholarship, the financial support for his mother's medical bills, and the ongoing friendship with Angelina. It all seemed like a dream he was still struggling to wake up from. He had grown accustomed to his new life, but it never ceased to amaze him how one small decision had led him here. He thought back to that rainy night, the day he had helped a stranger fix her tire. Who would have thought that a simple act of kindness would have such far-reaching consequences? In his wildest dreams, he never imagined it would change his life. All he had done was offer help to a person in need without expectation. But what came from it, what followed, was beyond anything he had ever hoped for. Jamal felt his heart swell as he thought about everything that had happened since then. His mother, once so frail, was now able to walk again without the pain she had endured for years. She had always worked 2 jobs just to make ends meet, and now she had the chance to focus on her health. The pressure he had lived with for so long had been lifted. And then there was school. He was finally attending a university, something he never thought was possible for someone like him. His friends and family couldn't stop talking about his success, about how proud they were. But more than anything, it was the sense of purpose that Jamal had found. The act of helping someone had opened his eyes to the possibility that he, too, could help others. He could make a difference. Jamal's phone buzzed, and he looked down to see a message from Angelina. She had sent a picture of herself, smiling with her kids, and a brief note. Just wanted to check in and let you know I'm proud of how far you've come. You're making a real impact, Jamal. Jamal smiled, his fingers hovering over the phone. He could still hardly believe it. Angelina had been more than just a benefactor. She had become a mentor, someone who believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. He had learned so much from her about perseverance, kindness, and how a single choice could change everything. As he typed a quick response, he heard footsteps approaching. He turned around to see a familiar figure walking toward him. Angelina. She had flown in for a brief visit to check on him, and she was standing there, looking at him with that warm, encouraging smile that had become so familiar. Jamal couldn't contain his smile as he walked up to her. I didn't expect to see you today. I thought you were on another shoot. Angelina chuckled softly, the same graceful demeanor she always had. I am, but I wanted to make sure I saw you, to remind you that your journey is just beginning. They stood there for a moment, the peaceful park around them a stark contrast to the chaos of their worlds. Jamal still couldn't believe that this woman, this icon, was standing in front of him, someone who had changed his life with just a few simple acts of kindness. Angelina looked at him, her gaze soft and sincere. You know, Jamal, sometimes heroes don't wear capes. They carry toolkits. Jamal's brow furrowed slightly as he processed her words. She smiled again, her eyes full of understanding. Your toolkit wasn't just a set of wrenches and screws. It was your heart, your willingness to help when it wasn't easy. That's what makes you a hero. Jamal's chest tightened, overwhelmed by the significance of what she was saying. He had never thought of himself as a hero. He was just a boy trying to survive, trying to do something good. But now, he realized that being a hero didn't require grand gestures or fame. It simply meant doing the right thing when the opportunity arose. He glanced down, a bit embarrassed. I never thought of it that way. I just wanted to help. Angelina nodded. That's the point. You didn't do it for recognition or rewards. You did it because it was the right thing to do. And that's what's changed your life, and mine too. It's a reminder to us all of the power of small acts of kindness. Jamal stood there for a moment, taking in her words. His life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. He had gone from being an invisible teen in a struggling family to someone with a future, with a chance to help others. None of it would have happened if he hadn't chosen to help a stranger on the side of the road. As they continued talking, Jamal felt a deep sense of gratitude. not just for the opportunities he had received, but for the lesson he had learned. Kindness wasn't about receiving something in return. It was about making a difference in someone else's life. Angelina squeezed his shoulder gently, a quiet affirmation. "You've already started making an impact, Jamal, and I know you'll continue to do so." Jamal smiled, looking out at the park once more. He thought about the future, about the opportunities ahead, and most importantly, about how he could use his own story to inspire others to do the same. The world was full of pain, struggle, and challenges, but it was also full of kindness. And that kindness, no matter how small, could change lives. Never underestimate the power of small acts of kindness, he thought, as the wind picked up, carrying the message into the world. They can change lives. And with that, Jamal knew his journey had only just begun.